It started as a whisper in the back of my mind, just a faint, nagging feeling. At first, I ignored it, brushed it off as stress, overthinking, paranoia. But the signs were there, and once I noticed them, I couldn't unsee them. For the past few months, my wife, Emily, had changed. Not in an obvious, overnight way. No, it was more subtle, slow, like a crack in a windshield, small at first, but growing bigger every day until one morning you realize the whole damn thing is about to shatter. She became distant, cold, like she was there, but not really. Her body was next to me, but her mind? Somewhere else. With someone else. The woman who used to text me throughout the day just to say, "I love you," now barely responded at all. The laughter we used to share? Gone. The long conversations in bed? Dead silence. And the way she looked at me, the way her eyes used to light up when I walked into the room? That was the worst part, because she stopped looking at me like I mattered. Then there were the excuses. Late-night work calls that always ended with her slipping into another room, whispering so softly I couldn't make out the words. Mysterious texts, the ones that made her smile, but never in my presence. If I asked, she would lock her phone, turn the screen away, laugh it off like I was crazy for even asking. "You're overthinking. You're being paranoid. You need to trust me." But how do you trust someone who suddenly starts acting like a stranger? How do you ignore a feeling so strong? It keeps you up at night. Something wasn't right. Something was very wrong. And deep down, I already knew I was about to uncover something I could never unsee. Confronting Emily wouldn't work. I had tried before, tried asking her directly, tried voicing my concerns. Every time, she had an answer ready. Every time, she twisted my words, made me feel crazy for even asking. "You're imagining things. You need to stop being so insecure. I can't believe you don't trust me." And every time, I walked away feeling like the bad guy. But not this time. This time, I wasn't going to let her manipulate me. This time, I needed proof. The setup. That morning, I went through the motions like it was just another ordinary day. Got up, showered, dressed for work. Emily was already up, moving around the house, her phone glued to her hand. I kissed her goodbye, just like I always did. But this time, I was watching her. She barely even acknowledged the kiss. Just a quick, distracted, "have a good day," before turning her back to me. That was my first confirmation. She thought I was leaving. And she was waiting for something, or someone. The stakeout. I walked to my car, got in, started the engine, backed out of the driveway, like normal. But instead of driving to work, I took a sharp turn down the street. Drove a block away. Parked between two cars, far enough that she wouldn't spot me, but close enough that I had a clear view of the house. And then, I waited. At first, it was just silence. The sound of my own breath, the low hum of the car engine. Seconds ticked by, then minutes. Doubt started creeping in. What if I was wrong? What if I really was paranoid? What if? And then it happened. The confirmation. The living room curtains moved, just a little. Then I saw her. Emily peeked out the window, scanning the street like she was checking for something. Or someone. She checked her phone, typed something. Then she smiled. Not just any smile. A real smile. The kind of smile I hadn't seen in months. The kind of smile she used to give me. And at that moment, my stomach twisted into knots. Because I knew, without a doubt, that she was expecting someone. Someone who wasn't me. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as a wave of anger and nausea rolled over me. Who the hell was she waiting for? And how long had this been going on? I was about to find out, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. 15 minutes crawled by, each second stretching longer than the last. My fingers drummed restlessly against the steering wheel, my breath slow and controlled, though my heart was anything but. Then, in the distance, a car turned onto my street. Not just any car. A sleek, black luxury sedan. Expensive. Polished. The kind of car that made a statement. I felt my stomach drop. The car slowed as it approached my house, pulling into my driveway like it belonged there. My breath hitched. The engine purred for a few seconds, idling, as if the driver was composing himself before making his move. Then the door opened, and he stepped out, tall, broad shoulders, well-dressed, like he had just walked out of an executive meeting. His suit was perfectly tailored, his shoes too clean for someone who wasn't trying to impress. He had the kind of confidence that only came from knowing he was wanted. The kind of confidence a man has when he's been here before. My hands curled into fists. He wasn't hesitating. He wasn't checking his phone to make sure he was at the right house. He didn't look nervous or uncertain, like some guy meeting a woman for the first time. No, this man knew exactly where he was going. He walked straight up to my front door, moving with ease, with familiarity, like he had done it 100 times before. And then Emily appeared. She flung open the door before he could even knock, her movements eager, excited, like she had been counting the seconds until he arrived. And then she lit up. Her whole face transformed. That spark, the one she used to have when she saw me, was back. But not for me. For him. She laughed, giggled like a schoolgirl with a crush. Then, without hesitation, she reached out and touched his arm. A soft, playful touch. Light. Familiar. The kind of touch that said, I've done this before. I know exactly how you feel beneath my fingertips. My vision blurred with rage. And then the final blow. Emily grabbed his hand, and pulled him inside. No hesitation. No guilt. No second glance at the street. No paranoia that she might get caught. Like I didn't even exist. The door shut behind them with a soft click. And I was left outside. Alone. Watching another man walk into my home. Into my marriage. Into my life. And I had no idea who the hell he was. But I was about to find out. I had to see this with my own eyes. Hearing it wasn't enough. Watching from a distance, guessing, wondering it wasn't enough. I needed proof. I needed to witness, with absolute certainty, the betrayal happening inside my own home. So, I moved, silent, calculated. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs, but my steps were measured, controlled. Emily had no idea that the back door lock was faulty. I had told her months ago that we needed to fix it. She had promised she would. She never did. And now, I was glad. I reached the back of the house, sticking close to the wall, my breath steady despite the storm brewing inside me. My fingers curled around the handle. Slowly, carefully, I pushed, and just like I expected, the door slid open without resistance. I slipped inside, the air thicker in here, charged with something I could feel but didn't want to acknowledge. The house was dim, the curtains drawn just enough to let in a soft glow from the morning light outside. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, familiar but suddenly foreign. I moved down the hallway, a ghost in my own home. Then I heard it. At first, just laughter. Light, playful. The kind of laugh Emily hadn't shared with me in months. Then whispering. Soft. Secretive. The way two people talk when the world around them doesn't exist. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stepped closer, pressing my back against the hallway wall, just out of sight. And then, kissing. Vet. Slow. Intimate. My blood turned to ice. I felt my nails dig into my palms, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. But then, the real knife to the gut came. Her voice. Emily, I've missed you so much. Soft, tender, laced with longing. And then his voice. Deep, familiar, comfortable. Me too, baby. Baby. That was all I needed to hear. That single word shattered everything. She never called me that. Not once in 7 years of marriage. And yet, here she was, wrapped in another man's arms, whispering the kind of words I used to dream about hearing. I squeezed my eyes shut for a brief moment, trying to steady myself. I had come here to see the truth. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw next. I had to know. I couldn't turn back now. I crept forward, just inches at a time, moving with the precision of someone who had already lost everything. My breath was shallow, my mind racing as I neared the doorway. The sound of their whispered words and soft kisses filled the space around me, almost drowning out my heartbeat. And then I reached the corner. I took one last, steadying breath before peering around it, just enough to catch the sight of them. Emily was standing in the living room, her back pressed against the couch. She was wrapped in nothing but a thin, white robe, clutching it tightly around her body, but it was clear she wasn't trying to hide anything. Her face was turned up to him, her eyes soft, vulnerable. Her lips parted slightly, her body swaying ever so slightly toward his. They were so close, their breath mingling in the same space, their faces almost touching. And then he leaned in. I could hear the rustle of his clothes as he closed the gap between them, his hands resting at her waist as she raised her hand to touch his cheek. Her fingers brushed the stubble on his jaw, a touch that was far too familiar. But then, something in me froze. My gaze snapped to his face, and time seemed to slow. I don't know what I expected. A stranger, maybe. Someone I could dismiss. Someone who would be easy to hate and forget. But when I saw his face, I felt the ground drop out from beneath me. The world stopped, because this man wasn't just some random guy. I knew him. I knew him very well. My mind whirled as my stomach twisted into a knot, the weight of the revelation hitting me like a freight train. This wasn't just some faceless stranger. This was someone I had trusted, someone I had invited into my life. The man standing there, so close to Emily, his lips brushing hers, was Jason, my best friend, the man who had stood beside me at my wedding, the one who had sworn, with a smile on his face and sincerity in his voice, that he would always have my back. The man I had shared countless nights with, drinking beers, laughing at old jokes. The one who helped me move into my new house, who comforted me when my father passed away. Jason. I could feel my body go cold as every ounce of disbelief and fury crashed over me like a wave. I had never been prepared for this. I thought I knew everything about my life, my marriage, my friendships, everything. But this was a betrayal on a level I never imagined. And as I stood there, hidden in the shadows, watching the two of them, I realized that everything I had built, everything I thought I knew, was a lie. For a split second, I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and tried to focus again, willing the fog of confusion to clear. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was just some stranger who looked like him. But there was no mistaking it. Standing there, his hands confidently placed on Emily's waist, was someone I never would have suspected. It was Jason, my oldest friend, the guy I had shared everything with, my victories, my defeats, my dreams, and my fears. He had been by my side through it all. He was my best man at our wedding, the one I trusted with my most intimate thoughts and moments, the one who had sworn to have my back no matter what. Jason, the one person I thought I could always rely on, the one person who could never betray me. And here he was standing in front of me with my wife. His hands were on her. He pulled her close, his fingers brushing the fabric of her robe as they shared that soft, intimate laugh. A laugh I hadn't heard her give me in months. A laugh that wasn't meant for me. For a moment, I stood frozen, my mind struggling to process the impossibility of what I was seeing. My best friend, the man who had stood in front of me at the altar, smiling proudly as I took Emily's hand in marriage. He was now standing in my living room, holding her like she was his. The betrayal hit me like a knife to the gut. It was sharp, cold, and suffocating. I could feel the air leave my lungs, my chest tightening as I tried to steady myself. My hands shook at my sides, and for the briefest moment I thought I might collapse right there on the floor. But I didn't. I couldn't. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. This was about Jason, the man I had trusted more than anyone in my life. The man who was supposed to be my brother. How long had this been going on? How many times had he smiled at me, stood by my side, all the while knowing what was happening behind my back? The thoughts raced through my mind, each one darker than the last. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run in there and tear them apart. But something held me back. The realization that this wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a betrayal of everything. Everything I had built. Everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me. And just like that, the world as I knew it had shattered. I couldn't hold back anymore. The rage, the disgust, it all boiled over, and I could feel every ounce of restraint slipping away from me. I took a deep breath, but it didn't calm me. Nothing could calm me anymore. I stepped into the room, letting the weight of my presence settle between them. My eyes locked on Emily and Jason, the two people who had just shattered everything I thought I knew. "Don't stop on my account," I said, my voice low but filled with an ice-cold fury. Emily gasped, her face draining of color as she stumbled backward, her hand going to her mouth in a frantic attempt to cover the horror on her face. Jason's reaction was even worse. His face went pale, like the blood had drained from his body. He didn't even have the courage to look me in the eye. His gaze darted to the floor, then to the door, clearly trying to figure out how to escape without facing the truth. But there was no escape. I took a slow step forward, the silence in the room so thick I could almost hear the blood rushing in my ears. My fist clenched so tight that my nails dug into my palms, but I didn't care. Every muscle in my body was trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of the betrayal. "Tell me, Jason," I spat, my voice growing colder with every word. "How long? Was it before or after you gave your speech at our wedding?" I saw the flicker of shame flash across his face, but it was quickly masked by a look of panic. His eyes flicked to Emily, as if seeking her for help, but she was just standing there, frozen. "Emily, the woman I had trusted, the one I had married," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not what it looks like," she pleaded. Her hands shook, her entire body trembling, as if she were on the verge of collapse. I laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed off the walls, the sound of a man who had just lost everything. "Oh, really?" I said, not believing a word of it. I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit play, my fingers shaking slightly as I swiped across the screen. Their voices filled the room, clear as day. "I've missed you so much." "Me too, baby. Baby." The word hit me like a slap in the face, each syllable ringing in my ears as the recording played on. Emily's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in horror. But it was too late. I had the evidence. I had the truth. Jason? Jason's reaction was a mix of guilt and fear. He moved toward the door, taking a step back, his eyes darting to the exit like a trapped animal trying to find its way out. He tried to bolt, but I was quicker. Before he could get past me, I stepped into his path, blocking his escape. I was a wall. He wasn't getting out that easy. "Where do you think you're going?" I asked, my voice low, dangerously controlled. Jason stopped dead in his tracks, looking at me like a deer caught in headlights. His shoulders tensed, his hands raised in an instinctive defense. "Dude, I didn't know she was married," he stammered, his voice shaking. "I wasn't buying it." "Did you know Jason?" I asked, my eyes never leaving his. "Or did you both lie to me?" He couldn't answer. There was nothing he could say to make this right. The truth was right there in front of us, and it was a truth that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I stepped in front of the door, blocking his escape, my body like a stone wall between Jason and his only way out. "Going somewhere?" I asked, my voice cold and steady, but inside, I could feel the storm brewing. Jason froze for a moment, his eyes flickering between me and the door like he was trying to find a way out of this mess. His breath came faster now, short, shallow. He swallowed hard, looking anywhere but at me, his entire body tense, coiled with fear. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to being confronted with the truth. "Dude, I didn't know she was married," he stammered, his words coming out in a rush, desperate. His hands twitched at his sides, as if he were considering running, but knew there was nowhere to go. The pathetic lie hung in the air, thick with weakness and guilt, but I didn't let it settle in. I turned to Emily. My eyes locked onto hers. They were wide, filled with panic, but there was no fear for me. No, the fear in her eyes wasn't about getting caught. It was about losing everything. "Did he know, Emily?" I asked, my voice much quieter now, but no less dangerous. I could feel the weight of the moment settle between us, the question hanging like a guillotine over her. "Did he know you were married? Or did you lie to him too?" Her mouth opened, closed, but nothing came out. No excuses, no apologies, just the silence of a woman who had been caught. The truth was out, and she knew it. I could see the guilt on her face, the regret, but it was too late for that. Her silence was the loudest answer. She had no defense. She had no way to explain away the web of lies she had spun, the secret she had kept from me for so long. Her hands trembled at her sides, her fingers pulling nervously at the sleeves of her robe. She was shaking now, her body betraying her, the weight of her own betrayal finally sinking in. But even with the shame evident on her face, I could see something else, her fear. Fear not of me, but of the consequences, of what would happen when everything was laid bare. And I wasn't going to give her the chance to brush it aside anymore. No more lies, no more excuses. I turned back to Jason, who was still standing frozen by the door, his eyes darting between me and Emily. He didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. He had come in with confidence, but now that he was caught, that confidence had evaporated. His words were empty, just like the apologies he hadn't even mustered yet. "I don't know how it happened, man. It was just—" I cut him off, the anger rising in me like fire. "Just what?" I growled. "You just happened to find my wife alone and fall into her arms? Is that how this works? You were just helping her with something, right?" I could see his face flush with shame, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. There was nothing left to say. But Emily had the nerve to speak up, her voice trembling with emotion, but still somehow defensive. "It's not like that," she whispered, her eyes pleading with me for some kind of mercy. "We never planned for it to happen, but we got closer and—" Her words were a blur of excuses, of attempts to justify what was unjustifiable. But I didn't listen. I couldn't. I had seen enough. What was once my life, my love, my trust, it was all shattered in front of me, laid bare. The woman I thought I knew, the man who was supposed to be my brother. Everything was now tainted by the realization that I had built my world on lies. I didn't look back. I didn't have to, because in that moment, the cold, ugly truth was the only thing left to hold on to. And nothing could ever change it. Emily collapsed onto the couch, her body racked with sobs, each one more desperate than the last. Her shoulders heaved with the weight of her own guilt, but it wasn't enough to bring any sympathy from me. I could hear her gasping for breath, her hands wiping away the tears, but I wasn't moved. "It was just a mistake," she whimpered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her sobs. I shook my head slowly. "A mistake is forgetting to buy milk." My voice was cold, too cold, even for me. It was the kind of detachment that comes when a part of you has already died. This was a choice. And it wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't an accident or some lapse in judgment. This was a series of decisions, one after another, that Emily had made, knowing exactly what she was doing. The truth had been right in front of me all along, and I had chosen to ignore it, to try to believe that the woman I loved would never betray me. But now there were no more illusions. As I stood there, my mind racing through the pieces of the puzzle that had finally fallen into place, I saw something shift in Emily's eyes. Regret, fear, but most of all, desperation. She reached for me, her arms trembling as she stretched them toward me, hoping for forgiveness, for a glimmer of the man she had once known. But I took a step back, and another. I felt nothing for her anymore. Not love, not anger, not even sadness. Just an overwhelming sense of emptiness, like the last thread of connection between us had snapped and left nothing behind but cold space. I hope he was worth it, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I looked at her for a long moment, waiting for something, anything to show me that she understood the gravity of what she had done. But there was nothing. There was no remorse that could reach me. She was still sitting there, eyes filled with tears, her hands still reaching toward me, as if I would just change my mind, as if I could somehow overlook everything I had just seen. But I couldn't. I couldn't unsee what I had witnessed. I couldn't unhear their words. I had been standing in the shadows, hoping for a different ending, but the truth had already been written. I turned away from her, my mind already on the next step, what came after. I walked to the door, grabbed the bag I had packed before I ever left the house. I hadn't known when I'd be back, but I had known I wouldn't be staying. I had known deep down how this would end. And as I stood there, one foot already out the door, I felt the weight of freedom press against my chest. I wasn't running away. I was walking toward something else. Toward a future without her. Without Jason. A future where I could finally find myself again. And that was something I would never allow anyone to take from me. Not ever again. I took one last look at the woman who had once been everything to me, the woman I had loved so deeply, and I walked out. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Starting over wasn't easy. In fact, it felt like a mountain I could barely climb. Losing 7 years of my life in an instant. Everything I thought I had built, everything I had worked so hard for, it didn't just disappear in a blink of an eye. That kind of pain doesn't fade overnight. The days dragged on, each one feeling heavier than the last. The weight of betrayal hung around me, suffocating me, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. Every memory, every whisper of what had been, felt like a chain around my heart. But do you know what has faded with time? The weight of betrayal. Because slowly, over time, I learned to let it go. I built a new life. Not one that would ever replace the years I had spent with Emily or the friendship I had shared with Jason, but one that was mine. A life where I could breathe again. A life where I could trust myself once more. A life where I wasn't looking over my shoulder, wondering who was lying to me next. It wasn't easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. And as I walked away, I made a vow to myself. I swore that I would never, ever let someone treat me like that again. I would never again place my trust in someone who wasn't worthy of it. I would never again let anyone make me feel small, insignificant, or worthless. Because at the end of the day, I may have lost a wife. I may have lost a friend. But I gained something far more valuable. The truth, my freedom, and the unshakable knowledge that I deserved better. Better than lies. Better than deceit. Better than the crushing weight of betrayal. So, I walked away. And as much as it hurt, as much as it felt like I was losing everything, I knew deep down that I was gaining something that would last far longer than any relationship ever could. I was gaining my peace. I was gaining the right to move on, to find something real. Have you ever caught someone cheating? How did you find out? Drop your stories in the comments. Let's talk about it. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away.